Good morning, everyone. My name's Dunc, and I'm currently a first-year Master of Theology student at U of T. Now, if you're wondering why I'm bothering to mention this, it's because it's kind of like my liability waiver. Um, Now that you know that I'm a brand new student, you can bear with me as I clumsily ruminate about this ancient story. Today we're talking about Matthew 13, the parable of the sower. The story is very common in Protestant settings. It's an easy passage to work with, and reasonably any pastor worth their salt can easily bring forth a worthwhile lesson from the parable. Now you probably see why I chose it for a class assignment. However, it might be more interesting to look at why this passage is so commonly used and why there's such a focus on a very simple parable. So I brought these queries to a couple of members of your congregation here, and we left with many, many more questions than we started off with. This sermon is going to be my attempt to bring a meaningful lesson from that conversation so that we can all leave today's church at home a bit better than we were last week. So, without further rambling, the parable of the sower is the very first of Christ's parables. And it's only one of two to have a written explanation in the gospel. So I guess the questions that we brought forth were, why is this the case, and why are we as Christians so fascinated with this particular parable? Well, an answer might be found in the way the narrative is built. The truth about the parable of the sower is that it is a solid working class metaphor. Like, if you're thinking about a timeless story involving skilled blue collar work, it's pretty safe to use agriculture, considering people are always going to need to eat. And I'm also sure that the vast majority of us have had at least one job or hobby where it involves energy, time, care, and patience. So we can all relate to the idea that the farmer would want to avoid wasting seeds in areas that will not grow, while also being excited with him about the seeds that yield a good harvest. If we continue to think about the imagery of the work, it is also easy to show that there are a lot of parallels we can bring between the plant growth and the human growth. That's a really weird way of wording that, so I apologize for that. But continuing on, the way that we as people grow better, and how we are bound to the factors of our surroundings is so clearly represented by the foundation of the parable of the sower. If we are surrounded by bad people, we cannot excel into the best versions of ourselves, just like the thorns choking out the seeds. If we as people are never exposed to people who think or act differently from ourselves, then we can never really reflect on our own selves. And we would never grow or learn to become better than we were when we were kids. If we grow up too quickly, we end up taking on too much work and responsibility before we are actually ready, and we risk burning out or falling apart. This is why pastors have such a high burnout rate in our careers. And it's why I need 7 years of school and 2 years of practice before the church will deem us fit community leaders. And finally, I'm sure that each and every one of us has had a time in our lives where we felt deeply hurt by someone we cared about. Often enough, when we feel that hurt, it is hard to keep working towards growing and becoming better versions of ourselves. Now, these ideas are often what we talk about when regarding the parable of the sower. We are the seeds, and Christ is the sower. You know, the soil is the word in the church. Will you be a good seed or a bad seed? And it's always better yet when you have an idealistic young person speaking in your congregation. And then it might be more like, well, the youth are the seeds, and you, the community, are the soil and the surroundings. It's all up to you to provide us with the best support possible so that we can grow and thrive and become great people like you. See, I know that one really well because that idealistic child was me for my home church when I worked there when I was 15. So, but you've heard all these interpretations before, and you've learned from them and implemented your ideas about it into your daily lives. To focus on these ideas for this sermon would not only be both a disservice to you, but it would also very likely result in me getting a very poor grade for my assignment. And I don't know how I feel about that. So let's talk about ideas and how they are the seeds in this story. That's so much more fun, right? Um, the way that ideas grow inside our heads and produce other ideas is itself an idea that has been around for as long as there have been philosophers. The idea of something can grow and manifest in crazy ways with the imagination. We've all experienced this in some way or another, being so afraid of rejection and ridicule that you can't ask that one particular person out on a date. Only for when you finally do it, they say yes, and you're happy, and it wasn't that big a deal, and you're wondering why it took you so long to do it. Or being scared about your driver's test being way too hard, and so you're dreading it, only to take the actual test and realize that it's super easy. And maybe that explains why there are so many terrible drivers out on the road. But anyway, the seeds of our thought can grow very easily, and they are not just influenced by our own minds. My brother was scared about needles always before, but he always put on a brave face until his friends told him about what happens when a needle breaks in a patient's arm. After that, it was really hard to get him into the doctor's chair at all. But of course, it goes further than this. We grow by being nurtured in positive ways, and that brings forth a yield of harvest in our positive actions, and our kids hopefully grow to become great people with our care. But in the modern day, we are seeing a large amount of false news and willful misrepresentation of facts in order to deceive us. We are being pit against each other based on the way we are told to act and what we are told is wrong. And this is also a mental seed that requires stimulation and care for growth. And the fruits of those labors can grow and continue to create more, like tumbleweeds or unkempt dandelions. So, what are we meant to do about this? What could what does this have to do with the parable Christ gave to us in the Gospels? Well, an answer to that could be that we are meant to understand how things grow and how things are spread. We are like seeds, but so can the things we create also be seeds in turn. If we foster positive ideas, we will do well. But if we allow negative seeds to grow, we risk our own crops being smothered out by unhealthy crops. Now, the fact that our community always interprets this parable as a positive is a good sign to show that we are trying to become the best versions of ourselves and that we are a kind and nurturing community. And we need to work hard to keep it that way because, especially now, it can be hard. Now, I said earlier that this sermon was very likely to provide any answers, only more questions. And I hope that each of you have had the time to think about the ideas that have been presented before you. However, I also said this sermon may be a mess, and if you're still listening to this goofy grad students in the comfort of your own home, the coffee getting colder by the minute because you may think that it would be rude to take a sip during a sermon, I will leave you with one concrete idea to think about during this week. Every action you take and every sentence you say to another person is a seed that you've planted in them. Whether it is your partner, your child, your best friend, or a complete stranger, you are the sower and their mind is the soil. You may never get to see what happens to the seed that you are planting within them. It may grow, it may wither, but you are planting a seed. Remember that the next time you interact with someone. the next time you see someone in need? Will you ignore it or treat them with kindness? The seeds of thoughts are tricky and fickle, and we are not perfect. We will make mistakes and we will be negative towards others at times of frustration. The goal is the intention to be better. And in turn, others will be better. And in turn, more. And so forth and so forth. Just be kind to one another, and the world will in turn be kinder. Thank you all for your time. Stay safe, and praise be to God.